Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You are listening to Sabah al Muslim on Radio Islam International, coming to you from The Rock, the Results Operations Center. And we go for our ASRI report. Joining us this morning live at the booth is Angelo Fick from ASRI to give us some analysis and the latest talking points, what's happening in as far as the election results are concerned. Angelo, thank you very much for your time and welcome to Radio Islam International.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum to you and to the listeners.
What are some of the surprises that you have seen and noted of late in terms of the results and the elections and so forth?
So I think for me the surprise has been how long the queues have been and some of the inefficiencies, so the tech failure. And a surprise in some senses because it strikes me as less efficient than the IEC has been before, and unsurprising in other senses because I clearly understood what the 350 million rand cut in the IEC's budget then actually means. The other surprises have been the very strong showing of the MK party early on in the counting process. And I think a further surprise has been the poor results from rural spaces for some of the newer players on the political landscape, including, among others, Bosa, Rise Mzansi, and then my last sort of vague surprise has been the very strong early showing of a party like the Patriotic Alliance, which gives some credence to the Democratic Alliance's remarks early on in the process about when it is and how it is that they're going to re-win the Western Cape.
Why are the results taking so long?
So I think the IEC's explanation is that in previous elections, particularly the municipal elections, one of the components has been the number of ballots. And for many of the municipalities, 3 ballots has been the norm. But in the metros, where the largest component of the South African population increasingly is concentrated, people aren't used to voting on 3 different ballots. And so the 3 ballot phenomenon in the large metros has made the counting slightly more complicated. And I imagine that there is some component there of party officials and party observers questioning the ways in which those are counted. And we also know from early on that separating those ballots was going to be slightly difficult and complicated because in some voting stations, you put your 3 ballots into 3 different boxes, and in other voting stations it was 1 box for all 3 ballots, so separating them out, telling the differences between them, collating them, putting them into batches of 100 and then counting them, reconciling the numbers to what the number of ballots is, that might take slightly longer. So this is, I think, part of why the counting is taking longer.
Let's analyze the performance of the 3 key parties in the country. What do you make of that?
So I think that this is a major wake-up call for the African National Congress. If most of the votes that have come in so far have been rural, countryside and small town votes, those people have been saying that the party is becoming a rural party and is increasingly distanced from the majority urban population. These numbers should be of concern to them if they can only poll 40% of that vote. What should also be of concern to the incumbents, the governing party, is that the third split since the departure of Thabo Mbeki from the presidency of the party, the formation of COPE, the formation of the EFF from the Youth League, and now the formation of MK, could spell a real alarm call for the future and the longevity of the party beyond 2030 and 2040. For the Democratic Alliance, I think they must be wondering what those urban votes are going to look like. And if there is a swell in support for them, because then that current figure of about mid-20s percentage might be realistic. But if the urban vote is as alienated from them as it is from the ANC, then they may have to do some deep reflection. And the economic freedom fighters may have to ask themselves some very tough questions given the numbers that are in so far. And they too must be hoping that that urban vote coming in is going to boost their numbers back at least to where they were at the last election in the double digits, and that their number of seats in the National Assembly are not likely to decline. So I think the 3 top parties have some concerns about that urban vote and ought to and legitimately do have that concern.
How do you make sense of what is happening in the KZN? I mean, you had the ruling party that was very strong until the emergence of the MK party. How do you make sense of the results? Yesterday, Gwede Mantashe was very vociferous on the point that this is playing to Zulu tribalism and we shouldn't read too much into it, and that's poor sense of politics. But whatever it may be, at the end of the day, they have emerged very strong in the province, taking the lead. How do you make sense of KZN?
So there I think there are 2 other parties other than the ANC that need to consider what it is that has happened here. If this is simply a case of the IFP or the ANC splitting between the MK and the ANC, the IFP may have some tough questions to ask itself. I'm not convinced that this is just some kind of ethnic or tribal construction. I think that there is a more complex dynamic going on here. And again, until the eThekwini votes are counted, I'm not convinced that we have yet an explanation for it. The Democratic Alliance may also want to ask themselves some questions, but if one looks at the KwaZulu-Natal map and those voting districts that have been reported, so far they've been much in the southeast of the province and the northwest, and the coastal regions have yet to be accounted for, as does the northeast of the province. And so the IFP strongholds, I'm not certain have come in fully yet, and so I'm hesitant to draw conclusions yet based on how the urban vote has not yet been accounted for in the metro of eThekwini. And until that comes in, it is unclear just how strong the MK showing is. It is a strong showing, but if it is as strong as it currently shows depends on how urban voters in eThekwini behaved.
That is Angelo Fick speaking to Radio Islam International as far as the ASRI report is concerned. Continue following Radio Islam throughout the day for rolling coverage. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.